welcome to the next episode of the HR Issue Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Britton, and this topic that we're talking about today, in the grand schemes of well-being, is one of the ones which I think people are frightened to talk about the most, and I'm talking about money, financial well-being. Now, of course, I'm not here on my own. I'm joined by another wonderful guest, Phoebe. Thank you for joining us. I'm not going to introduce you because I'll probably butcher it, so I'm getting everyone to introduce themselves. So why don't you tell the
No worries.
listeners who you are, what it is you do, and why we should care about financial well-being.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for having me. First of all, it's a lovely office for anyone who is watching this on audio. My name is Phoebe Matthews, and I'm part of the Community Engagement Specialist team at Nudge, which is one of your very nice financial wellbeing benefits that you have through Reward Gateway. So it's basically my job to obviously have lovely times doing podcasts like this, but also to make sure that we are increasing people's knowledge when it comes to the topic of financial wellbeing, also in a way that is meaningful to them. So what might be most important for Chris could be completely different for Phoebe or Lucy or whoever. So that's really what my job is. And I've got to say, it's one of the best jobs in the world. And I'm not just saying that. It genuinely is.
Yeah, well, take that. Yeah, if you're speaking passionately about what you do, that means you obviously care, which is half the battle sometimes. Why money, though? What is it about money or financial well-being more broadly? Is there something in that kind of interests you specifically?
Yeah, I think for me, and it's quite a personal experience, but when you have had an experience where you are finding that money is not coming in when it's supposed to, say for example, say you're freelancing, it can be a really tricky time. You're not quite sure how to manage your finances. You know that you'd like more money, but how can you go about it? So my personal situation was that I was freelancing as a presenter, and I thought, yeah, I'm gonna make the big bucks. It's gonna be amazing. But unfortunately, times are difficult, and it can be really difficult to find those sources of income. Therefore, how on earth am I going to be able to budget from month to month when I don't necessarily know my income? Off the back of that, then, I said, absolutely no way am I going to continue down this trajectory. I really want to be able to help people full time. So we almost married up presenting life with also, of course, financial well-being. So I was able to learn at the same time as everyone else who was in my money masterclasses. So it was really that opportunity to come along and say, no, today's the day I'm going to learn about budgeting. Today's the day that I'm going to increase my knowledge and my financial well-being in that particular area. Once I've got that building block, I can then move on to other things.
Love it. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's shaped by your own personal and lived experience of life. It's kind of thrust you into a career talking about something which, as I mentioned, lots of people are scared of, don't know how to, feel embarrassed or awkward or shameful. It's one of those historic taboo topics, particularly here in the UK, but probably actually all around the world. For those who don't know, you work for Nudge.
Yes.
So tell me, Nudge, in a snapshot, what did Nudge do?
Yeah, absolutely. So Nudge, essentially, we are an impartial financial education platform. And our main aim is to make sure that anyone across the globe feels that they have access to financial well-being. So whether it is, people are struggling with debts that they might have, whether it is saving for, say, something that they really wanted to save for their whole lives, or even looking towards things like retirement and pensions, retirement funds. So we just want, to have, for people to be able to have that platform where they can say, right, I'm struggling with a certain area of my finances. I know where to go. I'm going to go to the Nudge platform, check out the articles, the resources available, so that, I can start to navigate through that area with some level of ease as well.
Yeah, love it. And I think when we spoke previously, you kind of said to me, we need to make clear that you and Nudge, you're not financial advisors, you're financial educators. And just for our listeners, just to clarify the difference between the two things, what is that difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So financial advisors are people who have usually been very much in that kind of world of, they've had those qualifications of, this is the path that I've gone down. So we're not able to come from that point of view, but also we are impartial. So, we can't be selling products. We don't want to sell products because we want everyone to have that same equal access. So a financial educator, on the other hand, we are able to learn about the topics. We are able to engage with those around us, and we are able to say, okay, we think this is working for these particular users, or we think that this particular masterclass has gone down well with Reward Gateway. So we're able to kind of tailor things. We're able to create that content that hopefully is going to be really useful for people.
Yeah, makes perfect sense to me. Before we dig into the actual topic that we're here to talk about, so money and financial well-being, that term well-being is obviously quite a personal thing. So I've been asking all of the guests on this season, what does well-being mean to you? What does that word what's that do to your brain when you hear the word well-being?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm very much fine-tuned to answer it from a financial well-being point of
Okay.
view, but I can do both. I can kind of think of it from a well-being angle and then also financial well-being in general. So something that is, I guess, a non-negotiable for me every single day is to just take some time for myself and just say, before I look after anyone else, before I answer any emails, just 10 minutes of pure silence. And that really is what it means, to have that level of well-being. It might sound simple, it might sound short, but just having that time to breathe before I come on a podcast and don't breathe because I'm talking so much.
Yeah.
It's just about having that space to say I'm going to look after me first, and then I'm going to look after the rest of my duties, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. Kind of taking care of your own self before you go out and educate, or even in a family setting, social setting, be the
Yeah,
listener or the person that people come to with the problems. I think we're
absolutely.
we're very inclined as human beings to try and fix and help,
Mm,
most of us anyway.
yeah.
And but actually that time to stop and reflect and think, okay, what am I going to do for me today? Sometimes that's overlooked, particularly when the pressure's
Yeah.
on, right?
Yeah, that's really what it means from that angle. And then I guess from the financial well-being side of things, then I think it's about having that ability to meet your needs. Of course, we want to make sure that everyone is looked after, we're looking after our own finances, but also then making sure that we have that breathing space to start investigating, how can I reach my long-term goals? How can I make those amazing holidays happen that I've always wanted to go on? Or how can I make sure that I'm looking after future me and my family when it comes to something like retirement? So it's about having what you need right now, perhaps having a little bit of room for fun because we need to make sure things are fun, but we also want to be looking towards our future as well. So it's that holistic view of what can I do for present me and what can I do for future me as well.
I like it. And I think money is one of those things in my experience. The reason I think it's still fairly taboo, although it's getting better with organizations like
Mhm.
yourself and people like yourself who are out there trying to, I guess, change the narrative around talking about financial health and well-being. Money for me, I definitely remember growing up and being a little bit, I don't know, embarrassed to kind of talk about how much I was earning. It was all very secret.
Mm.
And any kind of bill issues that came up or rent as it was back then, now more mortgages, those types of things I've always kind of in my head thought, right, just got to try and figure this out for myself. And that leads to overthinking, catastrophizing, and educated guesses based on nothing but just guesses. You think you're educated, but you're not. And do you see in your work, is there a link between how someone's relationship with money, good or otherwise, does that impact their mental well-being? Can you see any links between those two things?
Yeah, absolutely. We see so many different links that are happening for individuals that join our masterclasses, but also our users in general. So, if, for example, someone is struggling with a money issue, say that quite rightly, debt is something is something that they're worried about. This can therefore lead to them maybe daydreaming in the middle of the day and thinking, oh, okay, I really need to sort this out. Perhaps that's then putting them off their work. They feel distracted. Quite rightly, they feel anxious and stressed. And this can, of course, lead to a lot of negative feelings, as you can imagine. But what that can then do is cause people to perhaps spend in certain ways or manage their money in ways that aren't necessarily equating with their future goals. So someone, for example, might be experiencing debt, and this is something that's really getting them down. Something that they might then choose to do is to spend more. Overspending is something that we see quite a lot because people want to feel better about their situation, or perhaps they want to manage their money in a way that doesn't necessarily correlate with those goals. So we do see that vicious cycle of negative mental health causing stress, spending habits or money management being slightly off piece for what they want to achieve, and then feeling guilty, stressed, and anxious. So this is the cycle that, of course, we really want to help break at Nudge.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think I can completely understand why someone would do that. If
Yeah.
they're already, for the sake of an easy number, let's say £5,000 in debt. Let's say they've got a credit card that they've maxed out and
Mhm.
it's 5 grand. I can completely understand the rationale why someone might go, well, I'm already 5 grand in debt. So what's another £1,000 on top of that? If it means I can go and forget the world for a week on a beach somewhere nice, I'm just going to shove that on another credit card. But all of a sudden that compounds itself and you kind of think, I'll deal with that another time. So I sort of understand the logic, but obviously that's not very sustainable. if
No,
people were
no,
to do that.
absolutely not. And it's not the healthiest of cycles, but as humans, we do tend to get into certain habits and behaviors that can take us away from our goals as well, and ultimately affect our mental health.
Yeah.
And something that a lot of people don't necessarily want to do, as I think we'll touch on later, is talking about money
Mm.
and breaking that taboo around it. Because you imagine if people like me and you can have a conversation over a podcast, over a mug of tea, if we can start talking about our finances, we start to break down those barriers of, oh, I'm embarrassed that I have this particular financial problem. And then you'll probably find that there's more people around you who are willing to do the same.
Yeah, inevitably, it's little bit like mental health. If you take that in its own rightful place in the well-being spectrum, 15 years ago, very seldom in the workplace did we talk about mental health. And even in
Yeah.
society, it was kind of when it really starting to gather a little bit of steam to where we are now, which is it's talked about a lot of time and resource and money spent on it, and lots of effort put in to try and understand it. Is financial well-being just kind of where mental well-being was 10 years ago? Is it starting to gather a little bit of traction in terms of people being more willing to talk about it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is that traction that is growing because people are saying, right, I'm feeling stressed. I'm being honest. I know what the cause is. It's my finances. And people are then thinking, okay, well, I can't necessarily change the cost of living crisis. I can't change the levels of inflation. So what can I start to do about it from my own personal experience? What tools are available to me? So it's been really great to see the increase in people who are taking charge of their financial well-being, but also quite alarming because we know that there are so many people out there that need our help. And actually, when we did a study at Nudge, we found that on a survey of 2,000 people, we actually found that 51% of people said that they regularly worry about their finances. So roughly once a week. You can imagine that's probably even higher. People are actually worrying about it twice a week, three times a
Yeah.
week. Could even be daily, considering the situation that we have now. And it is really worrying. But again, it's something that we'd love to have a handle in changing.
Yeah, so 51% of the population, let's just say, are worrying about their finances at least once a week.
Yeah,
And that's no doubt exacerbated by what they see on the news,
yeah,
uncertainty about interest rates, tariffs coming from the US, job uncertainty, particularly here in the UK. So it's all kind of stoking the flames of concern. And inevitably, that's going to be fueling mental health,
yeah,
at the very least, concerns.
yeah.
But for people who are struggling anyway, that's just might be the final nail in the coffin in terms of their mental health becoming a bit of a crisis point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've kind of touched on, if people are worrying about their mental health, their financial health therefore suffers. And we just want to remove this cycle from people's lives. And I think that's really where I guess the definition that we have at Nudge of being financially well is to work out where those areas are where you perhaps don't understand certain financial aspects. So it could be that people have never created a budget. It could be saying, okay, my next task is to create a budget. So therefore, you then have that skill of being able to budget, which then will hopefully lead to action. So positive action, spending on things that you need to spend on, and then making sure that there's some for things like repaying debt or saving, investing. And then you should hopefully feel that there is a level of I guess less stress, but also less also more hope, I would say as well. So that's kind of the nudge definition. And I think that fits in quite nicely with the conversation that we're having today, because we want to get people out of this space of saying, no, I don't know what I need to do. When actually there are clear steps that you can start to take. You just have to decide which area am I going to focus on first, and then you can start to conquer the rest.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's a bit of a theme of this season of all the people we've been speaking to. There's a lot of people telling us that, and I completely agree, if you leave it and try and do these big bang changes, it feels so overwhelming, so all consuming, you don't know where to start.
Yeah,
But actually, it sounds like what you're saying is if you perhaps focus on one area, which through a bit of self reflection or something like that is an area that's important to you. So if you're chucking loads of money away and you're going, where the hell's that gone? I've got no idea that's gone. Start with budgeting and master the skill of budgeting first,
yeah,
and then move on from that, and then start thinking about, okay, with that money that I've saved from being a better budgeter, what am I going to do with that? Can I invest that? Can I save that in a different account somewhere? But all of a sudden it becomes little manageable things rather than going, how do I tackle this big, massive debt?
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you work in a financial sector or you work within financial well-being, no one is immune from having this kind of analysis paralysis, as we call
Mm.
it. Everyone is going to have that area of their life that they're trying to fix with their finances, and they just think, "Oh, I'm completely overwhelmed, and just gonna give up now because it's not working." So it is really something that affects us all. And as we've started to discuss, having an eye on the budget is one of the best steps that you can really start to implement, because that then, as you said, opens the gates to knowing where you can be cutting back, knowing what you can then put any underspend that you might have towards as well.
Mm. I think that's quite fascinating from a workplace perspective. So I guess it begs the question in terms of our listeners are typically going to be HR leaders
Yeah.
and they might have some say over spend on things like benefits or education in their organizations. But at the very least, as most HR professionals do, we want to try and help people within our businesses thrive and be the best versions of themselves. So, is there any kind of top tips that you would recommend how we can apply that logic in terms of learn about budgeting, help people be more resourceful, that sort of stuff, educate them in the workplace to make it feel like the workplace is caring about them fully as a human beings? And I guess the second part of this question is there any limitations to what we can do from a business perspective or HR perspective, like where we don't cross a certain boundary?
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be difficult not to cross that
Mm.
boundary. So we do have to be quite careful. But I think one of the best things that the HR teams or other employees who are just really willing to get involved is to start talking about money. Because here in the UK and actually across the globe, what we find is that people are a little bit shy when it comes to talking about money. They don't necessarily want to have these conversations. So if HR teams or HR leaders can start opening up that conversation, it's going to make people feel like, do you know what, actually, that person has my back. This organization has my best interests at heart. So it can be difficult to know how you're going to open up those conversations. And it might be a case of thinking, oh, okay, well, I know I need to do something. Maybe I should just share a really personal story about my finances. And that might not be something that you're comfortable with doing. But if we can encourage people to, start thinking creatively, like perhaps it could be opening up a Teams channel or a Slack channel saying if anyone has any kind of money questions, we're not able to give financial advice,
Yeah.
but we are able to start sharing those kind of problems. So, for example, at our organization, something that we have is a women's network. So, any questions that are kind of, I guess, from a women's perspective, women's finances, we can start to compare notes, we can compare and contrast and really start to build up levels of confidence that way. So you might have, virtual channels. You might also think, okay, I want people to have, imagery everywhere so that they're able to have that help if they don't necessarily want to talk about finances. Because fun little stat for you, only around 7% of people who we actually asked in our surveys mentioned that they were happy to talk about their finances at work. That's 93% of people saying, do you know what? It's not for me. I'm not having these kinds of conversations. And it kind of breaks it down then into how people talk about money. Some people don't want to talk about it at all. Some people might choose to confide in a friend because they don't want to get their family involved with kind of these directly linked kind of conversations. You might not want to talk to a partner. It could also be that you want to pick a trusted friend. So people are going to come from it from different angles. But I guess going back to your question about HR, how HR teams can get involved, it could be a case of you have people there who want to keep it quite quiet, quite hush hush. So it could be a case of, as you've done around this office actually, having those advertisements for things like Nudge or other wellbeing resources that you have, so that people have those options, whether it is verbally, whether it is things like Slack channels, Teams, or whether they just want to see a poster, they want to quickly scan the QR code, and they want to try and work through it themselves.
Yeah.
There's plenty of things to be exploring for sure.
Yeah, and just on that stat about the 7%,
Mm,
comfortable talking about it. So I guess if my quick math, if we add that on top of the stat you shared a moment ago, which is 51% of people are worrying about this at least once a week, but only 7% of people are willing to talk about it, that means there's a whatever 44% of people in that category who are actively worrying about it,
yeah,
but not talking about it out loud.
absolutely.
And we know from general mental well-being and mental health, bottling things up, keeping things to yourself, only typically goes one way, which is stress, anxiety, burnout, depression, or whatever else happens. So I guess, is there definitely some logic, not just from a it's the common sense thing to do. But actually, from a mental well-being perspective, talking about your worries out loud in an area which is less of talked about can only be a good thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's entirely up to you how personal you want to get,
Of course.
especially if it's with work colleagues and perhaps you're not necessarily comfortable in having those same conversations, but just choosing someone that you can really trust, in.
Yeah.
Trusting your judgment is going to be a key here as to who you choose to talk to.
Mm.
But I think from a workplace perspective, the benefits and the reasons why it's really important for these teams to get involved is because if you've got someone who is sat at their laptop, they're at work, and you feel like they're not necessarily present, and you can see that they're really struggling, how on earth are you going to help them? It could well be that the fact that you've set up dedicated channels, or the fact that you have, put those resources under people's noses, it means that they have a chance in being able to get back to themselves, get back to feeling productive as well. So there's benefits for the individual, but also for the organization too.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess that feeling of knowing you've got resources. So for those people who don't want to talk about it,
Mhm.
to your point, if they see a poster on the wall or on a notice board or on a screen or something like that with a QR code, they could quickly scan it without
Yeah.
anyone realizing, and they're not feeling like they're being exposed or anything like that. Then actually they can access that type of education on their own device without anyone needing to know about it, if
Yeah.
that's how that's the headspace they're in, and maybe get some self-help as opposed to sitting there worrying about where do they turn. But at least if we can, as organizations, signpost people, we can't fix everyone, nor would that be the right thing to do, but we can signpost people to help themselves, particularly in taboo areas. That feels like a middle ground that's worth having, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And signposting really is the key word there, because as you've mentioned, we don't want to get into tricky territory where maybe HR teams are having questions, quite personalized questions,
Yeah.
I would say. What do I do with my mortgage? What do I do with my retirement funds? It can be quite overwhelming for the HR teams as well. So it's just about thinking, how can we make sure that people know which resources are available to themselves? So at Reward Gateway, of course, you have many, many wonderful wellbeing resources. Something actually off the back of that, which might be appropriate for those who don't want to talk about their finances straight away to someone else, could be, first of all, investigating where you're currently at. And this goes for HR teams and individuals alike. So something that we have actually on the Nudge platform is something called the Financial Health Checkup, which is where you can answer a series of 10 questions. They're all confidential, and you can work through them one by one. And at the end of that, you'll have a score out of 100. And that will indicate to you what's going well, and also maybe what needs a little bit of improvement.
Mm.
We've got to pat ourselves on the back first and then see how we can make that change. So, colleagues and organizations, they might wish to use that tool if they are thinking, right, my borrowing feels out of control, but I think I'm quite good at planning for the future. We might have these contradictions when it comes to people taking that test, but it is a great place and an indicator if you are currently struggling. And then, of course, you've got a whole list of articles and resources to then go ahead and read in case there is something that piques your interest.
Yeah, and that's a really great starting point for people who
Yeah.
don't know where to start. It all feels important, and it all feels scary, and it all feels traumatic to even try and think about it. By using something like a simple financial health checker, where you say 10 questions,
10
so
questions. Yeah.
they'll take you a
5
couple of
minutes.
minutes to fill
Yeah.
it in. Then you can then go, right, that's my thing that I'm going to focus on to begin with, and then you can build on it as time goes on. And I guess maybe there's something, I don't know if there is or not, but if you've got a score, then I guess people can keep a track of their score if they read
Yes.
to it, and they can see if it's improving and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we usually recommend is that people repeat this test maybe every 6 to 12 months,
Sure.
so that they're able to see that score improve. Because the chances are, if you've been having a look around the platform, you've been starting to really implement those resources that you've seen, the chances are your score is going to increase, along with your confidence as well. And that's ultimately what leads to financial well-being then. So all pointing in the right direction.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. One of the things that I quite often talk about when it comes to the role of HR is there's a lot placed on HR shoulders, right? In
Yeah.
terms of by the nature of who we are as people. So we typically try and fix because we care, and we always want to try and be the best and that we can for other people in particular, often at the sacrifice of our own sanity
Yeah.
and time and working day and productivity. But there's a lot that's placed on our shoulders, which I think is just unreasonable. Um, Being asked to be the custodians of culture, being asked to be the people that do performance management, being asked to the people that fix everything, it's unreasonable. We need help. So one of the things I remember doing, this is when the cost of living crisis was really just kicking into life at a previous organization, is okay, we can't fix this. That's not an HR thing to do. And but what can we do to enlist the help of our employees across the organization to help each other? So we kind of created this space, like you said, it was
Yeah.
online. It wasn't through Slack or Teams, but similar sort of setup, and where we kind of pose a question: what are you doing, or what have you done recently, which has allowed you to help your money go further? And that just creates this space where employees were just sending links to say, oh, I've seen this great deal on new tires, or I've seen this, have you seen the club card thing that gets you this extra points, or here's a link to some vouchers that I found, or here's a holiday club which is doing a discount in this area. And all of a sudden we're creating or curating all of this employee-led resource without HR feeling like it needs to be them that does it. And I don't know if there's something in it where, is it easier as an employee listening to your peers and seeking advice from people who you class as a peer rather than HR telling you what to do? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a really hard question because, you know, I completely understand that when you're part of a HR team, it can feel like you've got all the questions in the world
Yeah.
coming to you. And it can feel like, actually, that one's not for me. That's for an advisor. That's for someone outside of the organization. But on the other hand, then it can be really powerful if you're all sharing tips.
Mm.
And I think that can work nicely with that idea of not having financial advice. Because you can have this channel, you can have a group, share your tips and tricks, knowing that they are purely tips and tricks. And something that we do a lot in our online masterclasses is we ask people to share their money saving tips. And if you've got if you've got quite a big masterclass of say 200 people, that's 200 tips that you can collect and that you can therefore distribute to your people. So I think it's nice to have the balance. I think a dedicated group can really make sure that people are getting those different angles and covering different bases that they might not have thought about. But then also HR, of course, are extremely helpful in explaining, the pension side of things or anything that, really fits under that umbrella. I think it's important for both to work at the same time. But also there's absolutely nothing stopping you from having champions within your organizations, people who maybe absolutely love the wellbeing benefits that you offer, and just having those people who will really shout about it.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily need to be from a certain team. It could be someone in sales just absolutely loves financial well-being. It could be someone in marketing who loves, let's say, mental well-being. So I think you can be quite creative with it and just finding ways to say, look, I know that well-being in general is really important. Who's with me? Who's interested in this?
Yeah.
Without giving people more homework or more
Yeah, of
responsibilities,
course.
there are people whose hobbies are genuinely, really involved in the well-being space. So finding those individuals can be really powerful.
Yeah, the power of many rather than the power
Yeah.
of a few, I think, is really, really useful. You mentioned pensions. So
Yes.
let's talk about career stages or life stages.
Yeah.
Do you see any difference in your work that someone who's just entering the workforce, let's say it's their first job or their first proper job, and I'm using air
Yeah.
quotes because I remember lots of non-proper jobs that I had when I was a kid, but my first proper job was working for a real company, um, versus people who are approaching retirement age versus those who are kind of maybe sandwich generation of elder care and childcare. Do you see there is a complexity and a differentiation needed in terms of financial education based on career or life stage that employees are in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, finance is very personal. That's something that we say quite a lot. And what might be completely crucial for someone in their early careers might be something that someone in their late career has actually mastered, and therefore it's not something that they necessarily want to go back to. But it could be that you've got someone in your early stage of career and they are very excited to be here, but
Yeah.
perhaps they are feeling overwhelmed with a couple of different things. That could be understanding how to work their payslip, what all of these different codes mean. It could also be a case of managing finances for the first time. So moving to the big city of London and finding that rent is extortionate and thinking, how am I going to navigate my finances, but also enjoy the city that I've been put in. So it can be a real balance for individuals in their early career. You've then got your mid-career. So this can be quite a tricky stage for people. So perhaps they have child dependence, but also adult dependence too. So this group of people, maybe they thought they'd mastered things like arranging their finances, the household finance looks good. But now that they have dependents, they might find that they have to take time off work, which can, of course, impact their earning ability. So it can be a real a balancing stage for this group of people. You've then got your late career. So this is where people are hopefully putting all of their energy into tying up loose ends for their retirement, making sure that they know how much they're able to retire on, and also making sure that any debt that was either accrued or maybe not paid off in those first previous steps, they're making sure that they've got a handle on this, paying it off, perhaps being mortgage free as well. So each group have their own challenges, but their own opportunities as well. And it is also almost in a way, and we say this in our sessions, just because someone is experiencing something that is generally for the early career doesn't necessarily mean that you can buy a house in your mid or your late career.
Sure.
So we do have these different definitions, and it can be helpful for people who are in those areas, especially when it comes to choosing your interests, for example, over on the platform. So something that might be crucial for early careers, as we said, could be making sure that you are managing your finances versus someone who is in their mid-career thinking, right, I've got some years to go until retirement. Perhaps now's the time to start honing in on that. And then I will put those final pieces on when it comes to my late retirement.
And do you see any difference? I kind of have this thing in my head. I don't know whether it's based on any logic or fact or research. Maybe you can tell me. The younger generations coming into the workforce now, they to me seem to be a little bit more financially savvy than perhaps when I first entered the workplace. And savvy about a lot of things, actually, about their own well-being more broadly, a little bit more tuned into the world and things like, scandal and what's going on in terms of social value and all that. They seem to be a little bit more in tune with that sort of stuff. Do you see that yourself? Are you saying there is, and maybe that's something that's changed in school or something like, I don't know, but is there more financially savvy or aware people in the younger generations than perhaps the previous generations?
Yeah, it can feel that way, and I don't know how much social media has to do with that. Because as someone who is on the cusp between Gen Z and millennial, depending on how you choose to class millennials and Gen Zs, I am in that middle gap where I'm very much of the opinion that I want to create a nice stable foundation. Everyone wants that. But I've also then got, different factors that perhaps weren't there for other generations as well. So thinking about high student loans, I have a huge student loan debt to pay off. So that's something that quite rightly worries me. And it's something that I think, how can me personally, I kind of think, how can I short circuit this or try and make this as painless as possible, but basically. So I think for Gen Z is we're looking for that information as short as we possibly can. We don't necessarily want to read through pages and pages of information about it. We do want to get to the crux of it. But there is a danger with just getting those short reels or TikToks, for example. And that is that the information that you are receiving might not be from someone who is a financial advisor.
Sure.
It could also be to get your attention, which is what those kind of videos are about. So we have to check how genuine these types of videos are. It could be that we pick up something extremely useful. They could say, if you're not thinking about your retirement funds, perhaps you should. It could be as simple as that. You would then take that message away of, okay, perhaps I should look into this. Whereas if they are claiming something and perhaps they don't necessarily have those resources to back it up, that's when things can get a little bit tricky, and we do need to be careful and do our due diligence.
Yeah, well,
Can't get my words up.
No, but you're absolutely spot on. I mean, I'm in my late 30s at the time recording this, and I do have a TikTok account, although I don't use it very often. I am on Instagram. I still use Facebook. And as the algorithms do, when you watch one thing, then they typically pop up with lots of different things. And I've seen so many little, 30 seconds or less videos to say, if you want to save money, then here's the 5 steps to being a millionaire.
Yeah.
And we kind of look for those short, immediate interventions that go, if I do X, Y will happen. And when it comes to something like, I don't know, making an investment decision, which for me, using terminology like that feels very grown up, like investments. I mean, what on earth does that mean? If I was to take that type of information from you can make £1 million just by doing this that I saw on YouTube, that feels a bit dangerous.
Yeah.
So do you think organizations have a role to play in terms of things like helping people understand what an investment is, or, what stocks and shares means, or the stuff that's real and it's all around us? Do you think there's any space to kind of advance financial education in the workplace away from the important stuff like budgeting, but actually into the spaces of things like investing?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, I will say it again, we have to be as careful as
Of
possible.
course,
But, when we're thinking about investing, it is something that can potentially help us to build our long-term growth. Now, I say potentially because it is
it
something
can
that
go up and
it can go
down.
up and down,
I've
of
seen
course.
I've seen the headlines. Yeah.
We've all seen the headlines, and I think that can actually be quite damaging sometimes when we see these crazy headlines saying, if this happens, then this is going to happen. So it can put a lot of people off. And if anyone was interested in investing, what I would say, without it being financial advice, is to think about your long-term plan. So think about maybe when you want to retire. Think about if you have dependents that you might wish to look after as well. When it comes to your investments, think about who is involved in your investment plan, but also think about other things like, have I got all of my money tied up in one place? That is something that a lot of people say. They think, oh, well, I've got a property, so that'll be me sorted. When actually they're not necessarily thinking about diversification.
Mm.
And this is something that a lot of organizations can basically say is a thing, the idea of diversification. If you put all of your eggs in one basket, you are throwing all of the risk at one particular investment vehicle. If, for example, someone had a property and they wanted to liquidize that money and they said, I need the money out yesterday, we know that's going to take a long time for the house sale to go through, for those funds to be able to be given back to them. So we do need to be careful about, throwing all of our eggs into one basket, so to speak. So I think opening up conversations around investing can be powerful. Something that we do at Nudge, as I mentioned, is we do have these channels to talk to each other about investing, for example. We are careful to take each other's opinions and any investment vehicles that we've discussed with a pinch of salt. So that's really important. But again, it's opening up that conversation, and the more people know that investing is something that could be a possibility, and please do your research, the more we're likely to be able to have these useful conversations.
Yeah. So it sounds like, again, the crux of that is open, transparent education so people can make informed choices,
Yeah,
all with a caveat of, same with anything to do with financial investments or otherwise, risky, always risky.
yeah.
But you've got to make that decision for yourself. But the only way to come to those conclusions is to have the conversation in the first place.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Because you might well work with someone who says, "Yep, I am a very high risk tolerance kind of person," but you might be talking to someone who has a low tolerance for risk. So you need to go into it and think, what am I comfortable with potentially losing, and what does this look like against my long term plan as well? So different factors there. Not only your own kind of attitude to risk, but also thinking long term as well can be powerful.
So I guess when we think about financial education within businesses and the role that HR have to play, I suppose this feels a little bit like most of the other conversations we have about where we're spending our money, our resources, and our energy on benefits. It feels like we shouldn't just be thinking one size fits all when it comes to financial well-being. It is quite a personal thing. It certainly feels very personal for all the reasons we've talked about. So do you think there's definitely something in it from an HR perspective where it's go and ask your people what's the thing they want to learn the most about rather than generalizing? And I'll give you an example of this. I spoke to a client of ours recently at one of our own events that we did, and she was talking about they do an employee not consensus, census,
Yeah,
and where you get asked loads of questions, but it's not your typical demographic data they're interested in. It's kind of lifestyle information that they gather. It's things like, do you rent or do you own your own house? Do
mhm.
you get public transport or do you drive a car? Do you have children? If yes, are they in school or are they in nursery? And that type of information allows them to build a picture of their demographic of employees so they can then make informed decisions about where they spend their money. So if they've got 90% of their workforce are renters, then it would make sense for them to do some stuff around, okay, how do you save for a deposit in rent? What are your rights with the landlord? What are your rights as a tenant? That sort of stuff. And that's where they put their time and resource and energy. Does that feel sensible? Find out what your people want and go there first.
Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes you can just be throwing lots of information at
Yeah.
people, and it can be like, right, well, I don't know what to take away from this. So I think you're right, definitely there. And something that we're able to provide off the back of masterclasses or any webinars that we provide is because we work with Slido, which I'm not sure if you might have heard of Slido. Yeah.
Familiar with it. It's the bane of my life because I can
Yes.
never get it to work when I need it to work, but I'm
Yeah.
aware of it.
So for anyone listening, it is an engagement tool which is anonymous. But it does mean that if for example, we could see that there was a problem with managing debt, if something that's really stressful for people who work at Reward Gateway, then we would be able to let you know very anonymously and privately that this is an issue for a lot of your people, and we're able to work that out based on what we're able to collect in the sessions. Something off the back of that as well is thinking towards the platform, seeing what kind of things people are going for. So, and again, it's all anonymous, but that ability to choose your interests so you can tailor it and you can say, okay, it's really, really important that I get a handle on sustainable finances. It's really important to me. Making sure that people are aware that they can personalize their experience is crucial too. So you've got the HR side of it, but also what Nudge can do from a personalization point of view too.
Yeah, personalization is key, I think, in
Yeah.
well-being more broadly. Just before we start to wind it down here, just wanted to get your opinion on the stuff outside of our work. So, cost of living crisis, the tariffs, the change in policies, the interest rates. It's quite scary for people, I think, if you were to read the news, listen to the radio, look something on your phone. We've already talked about social media as well. Do you think, or do you have any, maybe this is what you do personally, should we create boundaries with ourselves about what type of information from those types of places we consume for the sake of, I'd rather not know, because it's just really upsetting or really confusing? Or is knowledge power and we should consume that information to be informed? Or is that a personal choice?
Yeah, I think everyone is different. That's what I would start off by saying. And for some people, having the news on 24/7, or having an AirPod in, listening to it that way, it might feel like a connection to everything that's going on, and that's fine. Me personally, I find that if I have too much information that's being thrown my way, it can actually make me feel like I'm not ever going to reach any of life's milestones.
Mm.
And it can feel like, what's the point in trying to save towards this thing? So I think there's a balance of saying, I need to know what's going on, but I also need to think about if I am going to reach these goals, or if I am going to reach a certain level of financial well-being, I would be doing myself a disservice if I'm constantly looking at the news. So that I think there is a real balance.
Yeah, I think that feels about right to me. I'm one of the people that I'd rather know,
Mhm.
and then I feel like I can make decisions based on that. But sometimes I know and I think, I wish I didn't.
Yeah.
And particularly when it comes to money, I mean, a real example, my 5-year mortgage is up for renewal at the end of this
Yeah, I
year.
remember you saying on our briefing call.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, almost, it feels like every half an hour I'm
Mm.
refreshing Sky News on my
Yeah.
phone to be like, are interest rates going to go up? Are they going to go down? And every day there's a different story saying something different, and it drives me absolutely nuts. And but there's things like that. I imagine there's a lot of people in a similar situation, either with mortgages coming up for renewal, or rent going up, or something like that. So perhaps coming back to what HR can do, maybe it again is just about going out and asking your
Yeah.
people what state they're in terms of what's going on in that space from a financial perspective, and starting to put stuff in place that might just help people who are worrying about that at this particular moment in time, whilst also making sure there's stuff in play for the future and to financially educate people better than we're ready to.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you in particular have any wellbeing benefits that are specific to Reward Gateway, then of course make sure that you're shouting out about them as much as you can. For example, some of our clients have mortgage advisors, so they're able to say, right, if you are struggling at this moment in time, then perhaps reach out to this organisation. So I think using the benefits that you have available, making sure that they are in a place that you can see them is really powerful too. And I guess going from a how can we marry the two of the benefit side of things, but also thinking back to what you said about the news is changing all the time. How do we keep up? Something that we're actually able to do is to make sure that people are nudged like this. If you're
Yeah.
watching
Yeah.
on the video, making sure that you're being nudged in the right direction, so that if there is a change that's going to affect your mortgage rates, or if something happens in your sphere of money, we're able to let you know.
Yeah.
I think we even have the ability to add what's going on in Reward Gateway benefits wise, in tandem with the Nudge platform too. So very, very helpful, and kind of marries the two together.
Yeah, and actually, I'm a user of the platform because we do have it, as you
Yes, that's what
say.
we love to hear.
Yeah, we use it across our people here at Reward Gateway in Edenred, and that's the bit I love the most. Is if I've not been able to refresh my news feed for a bit, but something actually does change, then I get a little ping to say that this is useful for you, and that's based on the preferences that I've put in to say that I'm
Yeah.
interested in, and that changes because life changes around you. So definitely, I would recommend that kind of personalization, notification, I guess it's in the name, the nudges, as you've described,
Absolutely, yeah.
and really, really handy because then it feels like it's for me
Yeah.
rather than just generic blanket
Yeah,
education
absolutely, which is what the news does. It just, gives us so much
for everyone.
information and then you think, right, well, what does it mean for
How
me?
do I apply that? Yeah.
Absolutely. And you have these abilities now, these features that can make it so that it reflects your personal situation.
Yeah, massively so. And just as we start to wind down here, I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, me too.
And one of the questions I've been asking everyone is just on a personal perspective. So that's Phoebe, not necessarily Phoebe from Nudge, but just Phoebe. What do you do in the space of well-being to keep yourself operating at your very best? Is there any little practical things that you do on a daily basis or weekly basis that make you feel great?
Yeah, well, I've got to say I'm a walker. Big
Okay,
fan of a walk,
nice.
because we were talking about this before. I'm from the countryside, so there's plenty of walks around near me, and that just really helps me to detach from whatever's going on the screen, whatever's going on in the news. As you can imagine, it's quite high energy doing webinars and masterclasses.
Yeah.
So having that brain space to say, I'm not going to talk to anyone except for my fellow villagers. I'm not going to do anything right
Nice.
now. That moment to take a beat, and it could be in the middle of the day as well. It doesn't have to necessarily be at the end. It could be on a lunchtime. So that's what I'd say I do for my mental health.
Yeah, love it. So simple as well.
Yeah.
Costs no money, just needs a little bit of thoughtfulness and
Yeah.
deliberate planning and action and makes such a difference. Look, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really,
Thank you
really
for having me.
fascinating. I think for all of our listeners who'll be thinking about, an area like financial well-being, where historically it has been taboo and difficult to talk about, we've taken so much away from this. And we don't have to fix it as HR, but we do need to facilitate and we need to spend our time and resources in areas that make difference to people. And it sounds like a real key turning point for being a much more financially well society is talking about it. Let's just
Yeah.
open up the conversation about it, make it less scary, make it more real, and just have a chat with people about what's going on in whoever it is you trust to talk about it.
Absolutely. Having that person to confide in is going to be key. Whether it is someone at work, whether that is your best friend, choose whatever's going to work for you best. And let's see the next level of financial well-being that you're going to achieve.
Yeah, perfect. Phoebe, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the HR Issue. It's been great to chat.
Thank you very much for having me.